Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the University of North Texas. I am sitting on the campus of UNT today, and I'm going to give you a recap of the Civil War. You may be wondering about who is this guy behind me on the horse. Well, his name is Diego Velasquez, and he's an artist. He really has nothing to do with the Civil War, but figured you might want to have a pretty cool backdrop. Anyways, let's move on and talk about the Civil War today. So, really, all I want to do today is recap what we know about the Civil War. I'm going to go through our 5 days worth of notes fairly quickly and point out some of the key things that you need to know. Now, normally I'd say you need to know these things for the STAR test, but we know that's not here this year. But you will need to know these things for when you get into history in 11th grade in high school. Okay? So we'll start off with our key people here. This right here, we all know Abraham Lincoln. He's the president of the Union, and he never officially recognizes the South seceding away from the Union. This guy right here, this is Ulysses S. Grant. We talked about this on day one. Lincoln had to go through several generals before he found someone who could get the job done for the North. For the South, they had great leadership when it came to the military. Robert E. Lee, he was actually invited by Lincoln to head up the Union Army when this war began. And hopefully you watched the video that I share in the links. There is a video that portrays Lincoln inviting Lee to lead the Union Army, but Lee declines this. He does not want to lead the Union Army for one reason, and that one reason is the fact that most of this war he knows is going to take place on the border between the North and the South. Um, and General Lee, Robert E. Lee's home is in Virginia, and he does not want this war to really be taking place on basically in his front on his front porch in Virginia. So he declines the offer for the reason that he wants to stay and protect his home of Virginia. Lee does not own slaves. He is not really fighting this war for any other reason other than he is protecting his home um, and he's really in his mind he's the best shot that the South has in protecting his home of Virginia. Um, the leadership politically in the South, we have Jefferson Davis. That's this guy right here. He is the president of the Confederacy, and he does his job. There's not much to talk about with him. Of course, you could research more about him if you'd like, but as far as what you need to know, just know that he's the president of the Confederacy. Okay. So let's move on here. Now, with this map, hopefully you've realized throughout this unit that these border states, these light blue states, they did play a significant role. Um, they were slave owning states, and the fact that they did not secede with the Confederacy is important. We're going to see this come up again when we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. The slaves in these states were not set free through the Emancipation Proclamation. So hopefully you gathered that and remembered that as we've gone through this unit. Okay, talking about the advantages and disadvantages of the North and the South. The population in the North, there's nearly 22 million people in the North. The South only had about 6 million. So if you're looking at just numbers, the North has a huge advantage. They have more people to choose from when it comes to enlisting people in the military. When it comes to resources, in the South, they didn't have factories like they did in the North. But the South did have the advantage of having the the home field advantage, if you want to call it that. Most of the war was fought in the South, so the South was familiar with the terrain. They were familiar with um, the riverways, the waterways, the just how the land works. Um, and the South also had great leadership with Robert E. Lee and other generals under Robert E. Lee, including Stonewall Jackson, which we talk about later. Transportation. The North definitely has more roads, railroads, canals. That's an advantage. They also have the telegraph, which is an advantage. Uh, and then, of course, the North has more naval power. They have a more powerful navy, which is advantageous for their war plan. Okay, which takes me to this: the Anaconda Plan. Now, the Anaconda Plan. Main idea here: the South is going to be surrounded. Okay, they are going to be surrounded by this naval blockade, and the North is going to eventually try to infiltrate the Mississippi River. One thing I may not have made clear in my notes before, and I want to make this clear now: this area here, the Mississippi River, where my mouse is, this somewhat divides the South between the east side and the west side. Now, most people in the South are living on this east side over here, but if the North is able to take control of the Mississippi River, it will split the South in half. Now, another part of the Mississippi River obviously is trade and transportation. And if the North can get a hold of this and take control of it, which they do eventually, they are able to cut off supplies going from the east to the west or west to the east, and trade and everything else, and it just slows down the South. And eventually, what they are going to do is squeeze, just like an anaconda or a snake would do to its prey. They are going to squeeze the South, and that is their plan. And the North is successful with this plan. Moving on here to the second day's worth of notes. Some of the major battles. Early on, the South had an advantage because they were winning many of these battles. One of the biggest, or really the first battle that kind of marks the beginning of the Civil War beyond Fort Sumter is the Battle of Bull Run. And this is where the North tries to basically invade the South. They're going to take 30,000 troops and try to invade Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of the South. Um, the North is not successful here because, whoops, sorry about that. Let me get back here. The North is not successful here because they have to get past Stonewall. Yes, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and him and his men. He only has 20,000 men, so 10,000 less in the North. They set up a wall of men, and they stop the North in their tracks. And the South is successful in this battle and several battles thereafter. And this is where Jackson gets his nickname Stonewall, because they stand there like a stone wall, him and his men. Now, some other campaigns by the South that were not as successful include Antietam. The Battle of Antietam is significant for a couple of reasons. One reason being the fact that it was the bloodiest single day of the Civil War. Over 22,000 people were either killed or injured on this day or went missing on this day. 6,000 of them, over 6,000, were pronounced dead. This is a terrible day. And also, to kind of add a little insult to this, is the fact that Lee was not successful in this invasion. This was an attempt by the South to go outside of the South and invade the North and try to end the war quickly, is what Lee thought he was going to do. And it did not work out in his favor. The Every time it seemed like the South tried to make an invasion into the North, they were unsuccessful. And most of the war was fought as a defensive war from the South, which means they waited for the war to come to them. And the few times they stepped out of that defensive strategy, they were not successful. And this was part of what led to the war taking so long to come to an end. So both sides early on thought that they could end this war quickly by invading one side or the other, but it did not work out that way at all. So this war drug on and on. We talked a little bit about this, the Anthem of the North, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. I'm not going to spend much talking about this. This lady here, Julia Ward Howe, she heard these soldiers singing a song, and she kind of reworked it and added some words to it, and we heard the the song in our notes before, so we're not going to play that again. Moving on here, the Emancipation Proclamation. This is big because this is where the war takes a turn from being a political thing about states' rights to now Lincoln is kind of making this all about slavery. He makes it a war about morality. Um, at this point, France and Great Britain, neither of these countries have slavery in their countries. And since the war is now about this idea of slavery, they're not as willing to jump in and defend the South, even if they are supplying them with loads of cotton and other raw materials from the South. They are not going to jump in and help. And this is kind of a turning point for the North as well, because now they have something to fight for as far as morality. The South doesn't see it this way, or at least most of them try to say that it's more about states' rights. Oh, there goes the bells there. Uh, it's more about states' rights in their opinion, but there are some states who say, yeah, we're defending slavery. Mississippi was very clear about that. We're defending slavery. We need this for our economy to survive, and if we're going to survive as a now an independent country, the Confederacy, we need slavery. So Lincoln Lincoln kind of lays it on the line here. This is a war about morality, and that's what this does. Now, what's kind of tricky about this is the fact that Lincoln only sets the slaves free in the rebelling states. Um, the rebelling states being the ones in the Confederacy. So these border states, slaves aren't set free there. And that is definitely a point of contention for the South and the North. Northerners who thought they were fighting to free the slaves, well, now, is it really about that, or is it just about winning this war? So this was debated, and people were not happy about the fact that not all the slaves were set free. Now, the South, they're going to ignore this. They're not going to follow this rule because they don't feel like they have to. They're not part of this country anymore. So they ignore this for the most part and kind of continue living their lives as normal with the fact that there's a war going on. Um, but it does create some rebellions. It does create more violence in the South. We see more slaves running away or attempting to run away, more revolts. Unfortunately for the Southerners and the slaves in this situation, none of them are successful. Um, there's nothing really organized well enough to create success in freeing the slaves on a large scale. So a lot of these revolts are very small and squashed fairly quickly. Um, the draft riots. Lincoln had set up the conscription. So the conscription basically is what we'd refer to as like a draft today. He is forcing people to join in this cause, whether they believe in it or not. And a lot of the people that were forced into this are people who don't have money, because you could basically buy your way out of this. You could pay a certain amount of money to basically hire someone else to fight in your place. So people who didn't have money were not happy about this. And a lot of these poorer people, including the Irish, they weren't really wanting to be a part of this, and they felt that this was going against their rights. And Lincoln basically put an end to these riots pretty quickly, um, including people who didn't agree with the war for other reasons besides the draft, were the Copperheads. Now, the Copperheads, this picture here is supposed to be a picture of the Copperheads. Basically, this is Lady Liberty fighting the evilness of these Northerners who don't agree with ending slavery. Uh, and really, these people just didn't want to go fight the war. Now, these people, these Copperheads, and this is a discussion that I like to normally have in class, and I can't really have it here, but I do want to lay it out there. What rights were being violated here? Um, they were being silenced for what they believed in. They weren't allowed to hold public gatherings. They were being arrested. These are definite infringements of our First Amendment rights, the right to protest, the right to freedom of speech. So these people aren't allowed to exercise their rights here. And not only that, the Fifth Amendment was being violated as well. They were being arrested and held without a trial. So Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and habeas corpus, it's that fancy term there for the right for a citizen to have a trial for anything they've been arrested for. And basically, these people are being held indefinitely without a trial. So they're not happy about this, and there's a lot of protests that come with this alongside the draft riots. So yeah, that's some more disagreement, dissension between people in the North and the South, people who are fighting this war for slavery and moral reasons versus political reasons. So keep that in mind. Um, Couple people here. William Carney, first African American to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Excuse me, Congressional Medal of Honor. And then Philip Bazar's first Hispanic Latin American uh, to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Both of them minorities receiving this award is a big deal, and we'll see more of this later when we talk about Reconstruction and the rise of minorities actually having a name in history and their legacy being carried on throughout history. Moving on here, the war. I told you earlier that a lot of these early battles were in favor of the South, and the North is having a hard time really finishing this war off and having a shift to where the war can come to an end in their favor. Now, one of the biggest battles that we talk about is Gettysburg. We spent plenty of time talking about that a few days ago with our notes, but this was a 3-day battle, bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Don't confuse it with Antietam. That was the bloodiest single day. Gettysburg, bloodiest battle. Keep that in mind. Okay. Um, After this battle, Lincoln gave a speech called the Gettysburg Address, and he talked about why this war is being fought. He talked about 7 years ago. Remember back when we were a country just starting off, how we were united against this what we thought at the time was an evil force of Great Britain. And there was no dispute between North and South. It was more about how do we survive as a country. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to being united. Um, so that's what the Gettysburg Address is all about. Uh, in this battle, the Battle of Gettysburg, we talked about Pickett's charge. That was a failed attempt to end this battle. Um, Pickett, he was a general in the South, and his charge to basically invade the middle of the battlefield and kind of bring an end to this battle was not successful. In fact, it was just the opposite. It was terrible. All of Pickett's men were killed, and Lee and his men had to retreat. Uh, Now, after this battle, uh, the North is not able to finish off the South just yet. And part of this is because the Southerners are allowed to retreat time after time after time. Another big part that happens at the same time as Gettysburg. So Gettysburg comes to an end in the first couple days of July. Vicksburg, this battle had been going on for months, um, and it was basically a battle. Let me pull this down here so you can see. This was a battle to take control of the Mississippi River. So Vicksburg, right here in Mississippi, um, the Northerners are trying to invade the Mississippi River, kind of complete that second part of the Anaconda Plan. If they can take control of the Mississippi River, they're going to take control of this war. And they can start to squeeze the South and cut off their supplies, cut off their trade, cut off movement, not allow them to communicate. This is how they are going to control the war from here on out. So after the battles of Gettysburg, which is up here in the northern part of the South, and then Vicksburg over here on the Mississippi River, this is where the South is now going to start getting squeezed by the North. Okay. After this, after the Northerners take control of the Mississippi River, they have a blockade set around the Atlantic coast. They hire this guy, William T. Sherman, the baddest dude in the North. They send him in for total war. And basically, Sherman destroys the South. Him and his men, they start this march to the sea, is what they call it. And it's basically a march from the Mississippi River all the way across to the Atlantic Ocean in Savannah, Georgia. And they destroy everything in their path. They destroy all the farms, all the plantations, cities, homes. They destroy everything. One of the rules that they were given by General Grant was no retreating. No matter what happens, you do not retreat. If the Southerners, if they try to retreat, you follow them. You follow them and you kill them. You take them prisoner, whatever it takes. You end this war. Grant was hired to end this war. That's what Lincoln wanted, to end this war. And that's exactly what him and Sherman did. Grant and Sherman ended this war no matter what happened. This was very violent. It was very destructive. But there was no other way around it. There was no more playing Mr. Nice Guy. We had to end the war. So they did. Um, Now, I want to show you this timeline. I'll pull it up again later in case you want to write these down. Um, there we go. Uh, think about this in order here, okay? Gettysburg and Vicksburg is really the turn for the South. This is where things start to turn in their favor. And this happens in July of 1863. Between July of 1863 and into 1864, Lee and his men are basically on the run. They don't have any major victories after this for the South. The North continues to just eat away at the South. And eventually, we come to 1864, November. Every 4 years, Lincoln is insistent on continuing to run the country as normal. He wants to basically make sure that United States citizens are still being given what they deserve, and part of that is an election. And he does get reelected in November of 1864. At his inauguration speech, which we normally see around March during this time period, we see it earlier on now in January, but in March of 1865, Lincoln is giving his second inaugural speech about how he wants the country to reunite. Now, his first speech, when he was first elected in 1860, when he gave his inaugural speech, he talked about holding the country together and keeping the country together as one united country. Um, in this second speech, 4 years later, this war has drug on, but it is in favor of the North. Victory is in sight. It's not there yet, but Lincoln is talking about once this war is over, let's finish the war. Let's finish it, get it over with, and once it's over with, let's reunite. I want to see the North and the South come back together as easily as possible. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and talk a little bit more about his inauguration speech, the second inaugural speech. His main focus is getting the South and the North back together as quickly and easily as possible. Um, and one of the questions on your quiz for this recap is, how do we get the North and the South back together? Lincoln's idea is to get it back together as easily as possible. There are some people in the North, the radical Republicans, they don't want this. They want to see punishment for the South. They want to see people like Lee hung for their treason, what they consider treason. Um, they want to see punishment for the South. They want to make it very difficult for them to re-enter. Lincoln says, no, that's not what we need. We need to make this as smooth as possible. If we want our country to get back to normal as quickly as possible, we need to let them in, make this happen, and finish it and get it over with. Okay. Now, just about a month later, after Lincoln gives his inaugural speech, Lee is forced to surrender at the Appomattox courthouse. Um, he's outnumbered. A lot of his men have given up and gone home. Some of them stuck by his side and stayed loyal to the South. But Lee knew that the war was over, and Lee wanted the war to be over. Obviously, it was not in favor of the South, which is what he was fighting for. Um, and as badly as he wanted to win, he wanted the war to be even more so. So Lee knew that he had to surrender. He sent a series of letters between him and General Grant, and they agreed to meet on April 9th in Appomattox, Virginia, at the courthouse. And this is where Lee was given very generous terms of surrender by General Grant. Um, Lee and his men were treated with kindness. The Northerners even fed them. while they were leaving and going home, uh, and and they weren't harmed. They weren't ridiculed. Grant made sure of this. Grant was instructed by Lincoln to make sure that the Southerners were treated with respect, and we wanted to get them back home and reuniting this country as quickly as possible. Um, and I commend Lincoln for what he did here as far as trying to get the country back to normal. As many things that happened that were so controversial in the North, taking away certain rights, freedom of speech, that's terrible. We don't want to see that happen. But the end justified the means, according to Lincoln. Part of our discussion question last week was, does the end justify the means? Was Lincoln justified in holding these people captive? Was he justified in the conscription? Was he justified in setting the slaves free in the South, but not on these border states? A lot of things he did were very controversial. But in the end, Lincoln wants our country. He wants what's best for our country, and he makes it happen. Unfortunately for Lincoln, he was shot and killed just a few days after the war was over by a man named John Wilkes Booth. Now, John Wilkes Booth, he was obviously a supporter of the South. He wanted fame. He was an actor. He acted at Ford's Theater, and while Lincoln, I'm going to skip ahead here a couple slides. While Lincoln was at this play, and I want to make a note here. I misspoke on my last notes. I talked about how Lincoln was there with General Grant. I was wrong. That was not General Grant. He looks like him. If you look at him in the picture there, dude with the beard. There I am generalizing. All guys with beards look the same. He was actually there with a man named Henry Rathbone, who was an Army officer, young guy. He was there with his fiancee, Clara Harris, and then Lincoln was sitting next to his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. Anyways, I wanted to clarify that as we moved on. Lincoln, he's sitting there watching the play. John Wilkes Booth jumps in, shoots Lincoln in the head, jumps off the balcony. He yells something. No one knows exactly what he said. A lot of people think that he said "sic semper tyrannis," which is a Latin term, basically means death to tyrants. And he felt that Lincoln was a tyrant. He felt that Lincoln was taking away the rights of the South. He felt that he was just a tyrant overall. And Booth thought that he was going to be welcomed into the South. He thought that he would have refuge in the South. That wasn't the case. There was actually a manhunt that went on for nearly 2 weeks looking for Booth. He did find some refuge in the South, but eventually he was caught in a barn. In order to capture him, they had to set this barn on fire and basically smoke him out of there. And he was killed eventually for his treason, or really his assassination of the president. And after this, Andrew Johnson becomes our new president. He is the vice president of Lincoln at this time. And unfortunately, as we move on into Reconstruction, Johnson throws a real wrench into things. He is not he's not on the same page as Lincoln as far as Reconstruction and bringing the South back into the North and bringing them back into the Union. He wants to make things a little more difficult for the South, not quite as crazy as the radical Republicans that wanted punishment and death for Southerners, but he did make things difficult in some ways, and we'll talk about that in our Reconstruction unit. So yeah, here we are. Recap, Civil War. Lots of cool things that happened in this war. Obviously, a lot of these are very unfortunate. Lots of death. 600,000 casualties throughout this war. Not a pretty sight, but it's part of history, and it is very, very interesting. Every part of this is, and I wish we had more time to talk about it. I wish we had face-to-face discussions about this, but we don't have that. This is what we've got, and I really, really hope y'all have been watching these. I hope you've done a little bit of reading. Maybe go down a little rabbit hole in YouTube. Watch some videos about this stuff. It's so interesting and very informational. So here we are. Civil War is over. Next unit is Reconstruction. I'm excited for it. And then after that, man, school's out. We're almost done. I'm excited. I've enjoyed this year with y'all. I haven't enjoyed not seeing you. I don't enjoy that. I want to make that clear. I miss you. But I have enjoyed what we've gotten to see here, this opportunity that we've had to learn online, learn a new way to learn. So I'm going to end this one like I always do. Make sure you wash your hands. Um, make sure you're obeying your parents. Don't don't be crazy at home. Uh, be cool. Learn some stuff. Y'all take care, and I can't wait to see y'all soon. Bye bye.